Welcome to a new edition of the Neon Jazz interview series with jazz pianist Danny Fox. His trio recently released their 2014 album Wide-Eyed, and he's hoping for new material to come out in 2016. Over the course of our conversation, he spoke about growing up in New York, attending Harvard and what he learned there, loving jazz and his future expectations, along with much more. Dig this interview, my friends.
I'm going to just go ahead and dive right in here, and I know on your website you're pretty clear about what's going on with you, but I like to hear in your own words what has been going on in your world lately.
The trio has been playing a lot, pretty much around New York. We've just been working on a lot of new material and playing kind of locally. We haven't really done any tours pretty much since the album came out, which was like 2 years ago. Yeah, we've just been kind of meeting weekly, which is what we shoot for, to play every week and workshop new stuff. And I've been writing, pretty much trying to write every day, which has produced, some new stuff to work on for us. Yeah, and we're shooting to make a third recording, hopefully, pretty soon.
Cool. And then you got the new album that came out called Wide-Eyed.
Right.
Give me an idea of what went into this album and how you feel about it in the afterglow.
The first album we made was, it was sort of a hodgepodge of tunes that I had written that, most of them were written with the group in mind, but it was sort of stuff that had come together as we were developing as a group. And the second album is, I think it's more, kind of shows us in a more cohesive, like group identity, like we had sort of figured out what we were about and what we were interested in working on. And I don't know, when I look back at it, it feels more like a cohesive statement from us, and like that we'd progressed as a group, and however many years we had been together at that point, I think 5 years or 6 years. So yeah, I'm still pretty proud of it. Yeah, trying to push on further.
You grew up in New York, correct?
Yeah.
Talk to me about your childhood and how you got so interested in not only music, but more specifically jazz.
I guess the first thing was my parents were very into music, and they took my brother and me to a lot of concerts, whether that was like folk concerts like Peter, Paul and Mary or Don McLean or, people like that, or taking us to see the New York Philharmonic and, dragging us to young people's concerts that we were, pretty bored at, but, in retrospect, it was really getting exposed to a lot of pretty high-level stuff, as a kid. And then my older brother, he plays drums, and I guess I learned a lot about groups from him. Like, we were way into classic rock, and then he went to a camp in Michigan, Interlochen, and which is, I guess, known for being a classical program, like, kind of a Tanglewood situation in the summer, but they had a jazz aspect to it, and he came back with a bunch of albums of people like Miles Davis and Coltrane, and I'd never heard it before, so that was pretty influential for me, hearing that kind of stuff. That's what really started my interest. Then after that, my dad revealed that he had a whole treasure trove of jazz records that we had never known about. I don't know why he was hiding it exactly, but once I got into it, then he had all kinds of stuff to offer.
So let me ask you this. Why did you pick the piano?
Kind of a boring thing. I think I just, saw friends of mine at school doing it, and it seemed fun, and my parents knew that I was starting to get interested in music, and they had heard about a teacher. It was a friend of a friend, and that's just started like that. I started taking with a teacher who was really, really open to teaching me whatever I was into, which at the time was pretty weird mix of stuff, TV themes and Stairway to Heaven, and eventually more jazz stuff. But that's what started me. It was just a basic interest in learning music, and piano was the instrument that most people were playing. We didn't have a band program at my school, so it's not like I, was choosing between instruments or even really knew what instruments were open to me. It was pretty much the piano.
So let me ask you this. Was there a specific jazz album when you were growing up that kind of blew your doors down?
There were a few, yeah. I mean, when I first heard these albums, I can remember one of the albums my brother brought back from this camp was Milestones, the Miles Davis album. I remember we were on a family trip in Israel, and driving at night, and he put that on, and that was the first time I'd heard it, and it pretty much blew my mind. It just sounded like nothing I'd ever heard. Yeah, just certain albums, like my dad had a Bobby Timmons album that was like pretty worn out, and it's just him on the cover. It's like a red cover, and he's smoking a cigarette, and listen to some of the tunes like from that, like This Year, and some of his like famous tunes, and yeah, that was another big one. Yeah, Monk, I think the Unique Thelonious Monk was that's an early one that I remember. My teacher gave it to me, and just hearing him play, playing standards. Not that I knew the standards that well, but as I would learn a standard, like for example, Darn That Dream or something like that, then hearing how Monk played it was a pretty, an early lesson in someone just putting their stamp on something.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So let me ask you this. When you were growing up and you were thinking about what you were going to do later on in life, was it always music, or did you have other aspirations?
I think at some point, in high school, when I started to get really, really deep into it and getting involved in lots of different music programs and meeting people my age from, all around, it was the most excited I'd ever been. So that was sort of what hooked me about, just pursuing that in some regard for my life. But yeah, I didn't know for sure it was going to be my profession, but that was like the main passion I had discovered. So
let me ask you this. It's not every day that I interview a jazz musician that's gone to Harvard. So I want to ask you this. What did you learn at Harvard? What was it that you got from your educational experience there?
I don't know. The main thing I took away was just being exposed to lots of different people and people with different interests, and I came from a pretty homogenous background. I went to an Orthodox Jewish school pretty much since kindergarten up through 12th grade. So yeah, it was just in terms of branching out and meeting lots of different kind of people and people from different backgrounds. Even having grown up in New York, it was still kind of eye-opening to just meet lots of new people and and studying different subjects. And I think I got a pretty well-rounded experience that informed also my musical path.
Yeah, it does, absolutely. Let me ask you about your trio. It's obviously a huge part of what you're doing in the jazz world. How did this trio come about, and kind of talk to me about the evolution of the band?
After moving back to New York, I was playing in some different groups, and I had I had started writing a lot in college, usually for groups with horns, like quartets or quintets, although I had played some trio. I played in some different things, but nothing had a very strong identity. Maybe it was groups that had, different people would write for it, or we wouldn't play that often. And I think but I kept writing, and there were certain tunes that I found myself writing that were they're longer form and stuff I'd written in the past. And I guess I tried to adapt some of these tunes that were longer and maybe had more parts in it than that I think I could play, if that makes sense. They were, tunes that maybe I thought, a horn could play this and another horn could play that. And at some point I thought, well, maybe it'd be fun if I could actually play a lot of these different parts and make it kind of more orchestral and use the piano in creative ways. And we started playing trio. Chris and I had played for many years. We played in Boston together. And then we sort of reconnected in New York, and Max I met in New York a few years after I moved back. And yeah, we were sort of working on this material in a way that was exciting for me and felt like something. It felt like an identity to me after maybe just a few years of not having that clear a direction, playing in some different groups that were fun, but not necessarily having a focus. And this felt like something that I had, arrived at and was seeming clear to me and exciting to, work on these kinds of tunes with these guys. And so that's how we that's how we started. It wasn't like we set out like, okay, we're going to try and do this and this is our goal for how the group should sound. But it went naturally that I was kind of writing these tunes. The other guys were interested in, they liked the music that we were working on, and then it just sort of took on a life of its own after that.
And then you have another project called, it's the New Orleans RnB band Tubby. Is that still going on?
Yeah, definitely. We've been playing a lot, and that's been something really fun for me in the last few years. A totally different situation to work in, but actually a really great foil to the trio. Especially like the trio music is, the situations we play in tend to be more listening rooms, and, it's kind of more introspective music. And working on this New Orleans stuff, it's pretty much dance music, and it's expanding my reach a little bit, and working on some of these classic New Orleans piano player, transcriptions, and has been really, really exciting for me the last few years. And it's informing even what we do in the trio. Like it starts to creep into writing and playing in a way that feels pretty organic.
Well, let me ask you this, and I know it takes a long time to get to this point. Miles Davis has talked about it takes a long time to find your inner voice. But if you had to tell me what your inner voice is or what your playing voice is when you perform, what do you think that voice would be?
And I like to think that whatever I play, whether it's something that's very like traditional sounding or in harmony, or if it's something that's a little more adventurous, that it's always pretty rooted in melodies that are catchy and rhythmic, singable or danceable, however weird they may be. I guess that's kind of my guiding force in writing and improvising. That it's something. It's something that could appeal to anyone, like that it's accessible in a way that means it just sounds good. It sounds good and it feels good. And when I'm writing or I'm playing, that's what my goal is, to like make the group sound good. And it's pretty elemental in that, just like searching for these sounds or rhythms that like excite me and that hopefully excite the listener and the other guys in the group.
Let me ask you this, and this kind of goes hand in hand with what you just said about your sound and what you're doing. Who have been the most influential artists that you've listened to, or your jazz heroes per se?
There are a lot. Definitely Monk. For me, like I said early on, hearing him, and it's the kind of thing where you hear like one note and you know that it's him, and his pieces having so many interesting little quirks and unexpected, twists and turns. That's hugely influential for me, because, I hope that when I write and we play some of these tunes, that it's surprising to the listener. Like when I go out to hear music, like I want to be surprised, I want to hear stuff that I haven't heard a lot. Yeah, I guess, just before you called, actually, I was transcribing some Ellington, and he's also someone that, in terms of like all the rich harmonies that he used, and these like really modern, super modern sounding, pieces that he was so prolific in composing. In terms of piano playing, like a lot of the big guys that people mention, like Wynton Kelly was early on big influence. Oscar Peterson, Herbie Hancock. Yeah, I was showing a student of mine this he was working on the tune Autumn Leaves, and there's a solo that Herbie takes on, I think it's Miles in Europe. I think it has a couple different names, but it's a live record, and he takes a solo on Autumn Leaves that totally blew my mind. It still blows my mind, but when I heard that in junior year of high school or whatever it was, and realized kind of what was possible in improvising and kind of exploring both like the harmony and rhythm of a tune, and also how you can interact with other members of the group, and sort of that push and pull between, you know, something very like rooted in the harmonies and the rhythm, and also really experimenting. That's something that was really big influence on me.
Let me ask you this. What's the best compliment you've ever been paid by a fan?
I mean, I guess it feels a little cliche, but I feel like when people who aren't that knowledgeable about jazz or really quite understand what we're doing in terms of technical stuff, or, you know, they don't know what's going on, but they really like it, and it like moved them in some way. That's a big one for me. Like that, it's one thing to appeal to people who know all this like tradition and background, and then it's another thing to just people hear it and it sounds good and it affects them, and that's always a good compliment. And, you know, people have told me at a show that they were constantly surprised by what was happening, and or they couldn't tell what was composed and what was improvised, and things like that are, you know, meaningful to me. You know, that's sort of what we're aiming for, and that's what I enjoy when I hear jazz groups. It's like not quite being sure what's happening, but enjoying it, and, you know, blurring lines between written material and improvisation, and everything kind of working together. Yeah, those are some of the things. I don't know if I have one main, you know, compliment that I've gotten.
Let me ask you just a general question. Why do you love jazz?
Wow. I think, you know, just that initial thrill that I got when I started improvising, that's like a very powerful thing when you realize that you can just create something, whatever it is. If it's a simple little thing or if it's something more complicated, it's exciting to be able to, on any given day, like come up with something, and maybe it won't be great, or maybe it'll be like some of the best things we've ever played, and then to share that with other people and kind of go on a ride with others and bond over that. To me, that's been, you know, probably the most exciting aspect of it.
Let me ask you this. What is next for you? What's the next project? What's the next album? What are you looking for?
We are trying to keep just plugging along, and, you know, some people, I've talked to some people, and we're more strategic about their career and, or like the albums they make, and or who they play with, and, you know, we should get this guy who's famous to be an album, or, you know, make an album that's like this concept. Or I've thought about all that stuff, but nothing has felt quite as right as just kind of doing what we've been doing, which is sort of naturally building, you know, which just comes from like the day-to-day, like, you know, sorting stuff out, working on writing new material and rehearsing it, figuring out what works and what doesn't work, and, you know, and we keep discovering new things, and we feel like we're getting better, and so that's just pretty much the general progression that we've been doing, and I'm pretty happy with it. I'd love for us to get more opportunities and play more places, and, you know, play different countries, and just have more chances to share the music that we've been really excited about. But yeah, first step is just to be working constantly with each other and developing new stuff, that's the guiding principle, and then, you know, it's up to me to make things happen for us. But yeah, that, and hopefully make a new album pretty soon in the next couple of months, I hope.
Let me ask you, this is my final question. Everybody has their version of who you are. Your bandmates do, your family, your friends, the fans that come out and hear you. But who do you personally think you are?
Wow, that's well, for one thing, like, I love being around people. Sounds so silly. I'm a people person. But I do, like, you know, I find I derive a lot of inspiration from just like my network of friends and family, and, you know, that's something that I when I perform, that I like there to be, you know, just a good atmosphere with like the group and with the audience, and kind of finding that balance between, you know, being being like a serious musician, whatever, however you want to see that, but also like having humor and like warmth towards others. And I don't know, that's what I like when I go to hear people or I play gigs, like certain camaraderie and shared experience. Yeah, I guess that's what personally I like to project.
With probably the hardest question, that was my final one. So hey, thanks for taking some time to talk with me and giving me your story today, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Thanks for listening and tuning in to yet another Neon Jazz interview, where we give you a bit of insight into the finest players in New York, Kansas City, and spots all over the world, giving fans all that jazz. And thanks to Danny for his time and his story. If you want to hear more interviews, go to Famous Interviews with Joe Domino on the iTunes Store, or visit theneonjazz.blogspot.com for all things Neon Jazz. Until next time, enjoy the music, my friends.
Neon Jazz.